Inside this room, all of my dreams become realities, and some of my realities become dreams.
What in the wide, wide world of sports is going on here? Alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You are listening to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute. Here are your hosts, Alan Sanders and Walt Murray.
Hey everyone, welcome back to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute, a podcast that celebrates the films of Gene Wilder 1 minute at a time. And it's Hump Day, halfway through the week if you're catching it live on the first run. And we always give a quick shout out to Hump Day, being Igor's favorite day of the week, an homage to our first season where we did Young Frankenstein. But we're in the midst of Blazing Saddles, and today we are going to dive into one real wild, crazy, everyone's punching everybody, even the fake horse gets overturned by Mongo minute, with our good friend now, Niall McGowan from across the pond. Niall, welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me, Alan. Been very excited here to go back in time to the Old West.
To 1874, as America was continuing to head west. Very quickly, I'll say my co-host, Walt, once again has a conflict, and he apologizes greatly for not being able to make it. He was hoping to be back for Hump Day, but hopefully he'll be back in time to close out the week with our next guest before we start looking forward to early next week. We're actually, and I can let you in on this, Niall, we have locked down the son of Harvey Korman. Chris Korman is going to join us for 4 minutes as we wrap up the movie, and we'll have all the scenes with his dad and the standoff between him and Cleavon Little.
Oh, man. Oh, that's great. That's a big get. Congratulations, guys.
It is. I was very, very happy when he reached out and said, I heard you guys were doing this and I want to chat and see is there anything I could do? And I said, well, would you like to do a couple of minutes? And it was like, we talked for about 90 minutes on the phone. And I said, hey, I don't want to just keep burning up your time. You reached out and I'm just happy to have you. And he said, oh, this is going to be great. This is going to be awesome. So I'm just thrilled that we've got actually Chris Korman to talk about his dad and what it was like to go on the set and watch him filming and all this kind of stuff. It's going to be really cool.
Yeah, awesome.
So that'll be next week, Monday through Thursday. But we're here Wednesday. Let's continue where we left off yesterday. The citizens of Rockridge had set off the explosions, and Bart was leading them on a charge down the hill. They had not yet met up with the bad guys. The bad guys were still trying to figure out how to get away from all the explosions in downtown Rockridge. So we're going to start with the good guys, all of the folks of Rockridge making their way into town, and we're going to end as they're rioting in the streets, and it looks like we're getting a really long crane shot as the camera is pulling up and revealing just how much of the Warner Brothers backlot is all dedicated to Western sets and other sets that they could use for these kinds of productions right there outside of L.A.
This is the last full minute then you'll get before the movie sort of like it just completely breaks any kind of like this is a Western narrative you're watching. It just goes into like the fourth wall is just completely tumbled, and at the end of it you're just like they're watching themselves in the theater and they're watching the movie while they're in the movie, and all that kind of complete craziness. Just
it goes totally bananas, and I love it because we talk about how Mel Brooks loves to have his characters break the fourth wall where they talk to us directly, and then by the end of the movie he's breaking every line there is. The fourth wall, the studio wall, the timeline, everything gets broken, but he puts it all back together at the end. And so it's worth hanging out till the very last credit rolling.
That was actually I was surprised because I've seen this movie like a bunch of times, and I was shocked in this like rewatch to come on here. I'd never noticed the few little bars of Springtime for Hitler that are actually in the movie. I was like, what the hell? How did I not notice that? Like the first 50 times I've seen this thing.
Well, and we'll definitely get to that moment. That's the Madeline Kahn scene. Before we dive into the minutia, and I know it's so exciting because I want to jump in. There's so much to look at. Niall, you are joining us for the very first time. We were not able to, through some miscommunication, hook up in our first season. I'm so glad we got you here in season 2. We always try to start off with a new guest. What has Blazing Saddles meant to you? Do you remember the first time watching it? Do you remember seeing it with friends? Did you like it? Has it grown on you? Do you hate it? Give me your thoughts on Blazing Saddles.
But it's a movie like I'm very fond of. It mostly associated like anything to do with Westerns. I just associate it with my dads because I think like most dads of people of my generation of course, he's really into westerns. I think that was just a thing of like men of like he's a guy in his 70s. So he just, every film he saw when he was a kid was a western pretty much. So he's got this ability to like, if he's watching anything and he sees some random guy, he's like, that guy was in, you know, and he'll just name some Randolph Scott thing that you'll never have heard of. But he'll know every one of them. He could tell you the friggin' life of Jack a Lamb, like, you know, like the back of his hand. And so, yeah, he was, because he's just really into westerns, but, you know, very much these old school. Well, even though like Blazing Saddles is about as far from a traditional western as you can get, like it's still got, it looks like it is, like it's got the presentation of like, oh, you could have, you know, the sets and stuff and the costuming make it look like, yeah, it was a western made back in that era. So he has a great fondness for it. It's only one of those things like, well, I saw him as a kid and I just liked it because it's, you know, silly humor and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only as I got older I started realizing, oh, it's really messed up that like my dad would show this to me because there's so much kind of subversive stuff going on in this. It's such a clever film as well. And there's a lot of stuff now, particularly, you know, and I'm sure you've talked about it loads in the show because we're, you know, currently in a more politically, you know, PC time and people are a lot more sensitive these days. So there's a lot more the real vibe like, oh, you could make this film now because it's too brazen about, you know, it's just, it's not afraid to confront absolutely anything. It'll just go in and do it. But you know, through that, discovering all this over the years, I was like, my respect for the film has actually grown as well. It's like, oh, this is actually like a really, really intelligent, like very brave piece of filmmaking from you know, from the filmmaker. Like Mel Brooks always acclaimed as a comedian, but like just in terms of his you know, political you know, his habit of confronting some of the ugliness in society.
Yeah.
Always, you know, deserves a bit more credit for that, I'd say, as well.
Well, one of the things, and I know it's hard to keep track of all the episodes when they come out versus when we record them, but one of the things we actually discovered, and a lot of our listeners are discovering, is we had some historians on early that told us that Hollywood really did a horrible job painting the West accurately. We got this sense of a whitewashed America. And about 25% of all cowboys were actually black cowboys who had either they were freed slaves from the South post-Civil War. There was Reconstruction. There was a lot of opportunity. The rail lines were moving west. There were a lot of land being given away. People could start over, and you didn't get a sense of that. So the irony of a Western satire told by Mel Brooks ended up being a little bit more correct in terms of its racial makeup than most of the other movies Hollywood had done.
I think that that's one of the things, though, because you know, nowadays, because my dad still loves westerns, every time there's a new western will come out, I'm like, oh, I should, you know, get a hold of it for him, like other than DVD or something, and then show it to him, and we'll watch it together. And you know, he's always like really up for it. But we are also now going like, I think we're kind of coming out of it, but you know, we went through a good like 10, 15 years there of the revisionist western. Which arguably even went back further than that, went back to like Unforgiven and stuff like that, but. I remember watching things like, you know, the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford and stuff.
Oh, which is, by the way, a really good flick.
Yeah, but he wasn't, he going into it was like, this is going to be like an old school Western. That's what he thought in his head. That's what I thought when I was lining it up. And then you actually get this very weird, ethereal, slow, ponderous kind of movie and stuff. And it has a lot of things that would be more accurate than old school westerns. Like, for example, a guy breaks into a room to shoot Sam Rockwell, and he's right in front of him. But because the gun sights back then were so terrible, like even though he's like 10 inches away from him, the bullets are flying off out the window and stuff. Because that's apparently you know, you see in old school stuff. Of course, you have shootouts. Everyone's just like, yeah, one shot, you're down. And there's, you know, everyone's very precise. But apparently, that was not the way at all. You'd have to just be firing. You'd have to fire the full 6 shots, and you might not hit anything. Like that was the kind of.
Well, and I think that's the theme that you mentioned, Unforgiven. I think that's why I love that movie, is the whole tale of this, you know, aging gunfighter who tells you it's not about who's the fastest draw, it's who's the most accurate draw. That's the guy you got to get first.
Yeah. But yeah, because of that though, like every time I line up a new Western from my dad, I'm like, there's a couple of ones that Tommy Lee Jones has been in recently that are just very, very strange movies. And they're just like, they're marketed as like, here's a Western. And you're just like, I've watched them with him. And at the end of them, he's just been like, what the hell was that? Like, it's just, and some of them, like, there's one that's out quite recently, actually, with you movie, comedy western called Damsel with Mia Wasikowska and Robert Pattinson, and I loved it. But it's very, very odd. It's more like a Coen Brothers movie than anything. But like, yeah, my dad watching that was just like really like, okay. Like, you just see him just like, I just can't. Why can't they just make like Red River again? Like, why?
Yeah, you know, I think they're using the Western landscape almost to be now the backdrop for either something that's, it's a metaphor for being either bleak or barren or hard, rather than it being a Western. They're using the setting to give it a tone. Because I watched, because I love Kurt Russell, and I watched Bone Tomahawk just recently on Netflix.
Yeah.
Which was talk about a strange movie. I liked it until the end. I think it just kind of rushed to its ending, which sometimes a lot of when you're trying to cross genre, it was a sort of a horror thriller Western. It was a little odd. I enjoyed the cinematography and I love the pacing, but by the end I'm like, okay, this is strange. But and then I realized, okay, it's not about being a Western. It's about this really bleak, crazy, an atmosphere where you couldn't have a cannibalistic tribe in a modern setting. There's cops would catch you. The police would be on you, and social media would find, you couldn't hide.
Yeah.
So you had to put it in the past. And so, and I love Kurt Russell, and he does that cowboy thing so well. I've loved him ever since I was a kid. Very first time, I don't know how far back certain shows go in the UK versus the US. I know a lot of times they're similar, but I actually remember him on Gilligan's Island when I was a kid growing up watching reruns when he was the little kid that got into on Gilligan's Island, and then saw him in some of the Walt Disney movies. And he's just been one of those actors that I've seen my entire life. And here he is, this aging, very, actually aging well, in my opinion.
Oh, he looks great. He looks great.
Can do anything.
Yeah. Actually, weirdly enough, from, again, a bit like, I frequently go home to visit my dad, because obviously I'm currently living in England. He still lives in Ireland. But actually, one of the last times I was over, he was watching an old episode of Rawhide, and I was like looking at it and like, is that Kurt Russell? I was like, yeah, some kid. I was like, that's Kurt Russell. Jesus Christ. Yeah. But actually, I will mention, because I really loved Bone Tomahawk when I saw it, and I know that the guy who wrote it, it was S. Craig Zowler, I believe he's called. But he's done a couple of Western novels. He did a great one called Wraiths of the Broken Land, which is very much in the same tone. Almost very similar plotline as well. But that's very, very good book. Highly recommend if people are in the mood for a very bleak but sort of quirky and weird sort of nightmare Western. That's definitely a good book to seek out.
I'll give it a try. I've always been a big fan of horror movies and scary movies, and I got to the point where, and I think my wife is the same way, we aren't scared by movies anymore because we've seen too many, and we've seen every kind of plot twist imaginable, at least we think. I think The Haunting of Hill House was probably the closest new story on Netflix that made us go, okay, this is a better way to tell a ghost story that's got the hairs rising on the back of your arm. So I'll give any kind of any Western motif a try. I won't say no. I mean, I like it, but I'm definitely going to watch it.
Yeah.
I'm just a fan of the West, and I know which is wild. A lot of friends I've made in the UK and in Europe love to hear stories or are fans of Westerns.
The UK has done a few, but they'll have movies that are blatantly not Westerns because there was no Old West in the UK. But they'll take the form out of it. Like I know Shane Meadows did like I think it was Once Upon a Time in the Midlands, and then Dead Man's Shoes are both very much based on Dead Man's Shoes is essentially like a remake of High Plains Drifter, but it's just set in like the northwest of England, but it's got all the tropes. It's just in a different setting. Just again, that's because Westerns do that all the time, of course, because then you had Fistful of Dollars and whatnot is just a remake of Yojimbo and things like that. So it is always an interesting thing to see, though. Just just take those familiar things and then just put them in a new setting and then just see how that refreshes them in some way.
And I know we're diverging, but this is great. I love having a conversation like this because we only get you for 1 minute today. I do a lot of theater acting, and I grew up in the theater and directed a lot of Shakespeare, and I've always found an interesting task to try to modernize or do something with the setting for a younger audience that they hear the word Shakespeare and they start thinking thee and thou and thus, and they're going, oh God. And so if I can put it in a setting that makes them go, well, wait a minute, this looks kind of cool. I thought we were doing Shakespeare, and changing the setting can somehow change your mood, how you approach a storyline that otherwise may be really familiar, but you may shut yourself down because you don't like one particular, like if you see robes and a Renaissance feel, you go, oh dear God. But then all of a sudden you see, like a punk rock version of Midsummer Night's Dream, and you're like, oh, so the fairies are like punk rockers, and okay, I'll give this a go.
Yeah.
It doesn't work every time, but it's fun to play.
Wasn't there like this is kind of a vague memory I have, but wasn't there like a version of Othello in the early 2000s where he was like a basketball player or something? Or
there was, I think it was a loosely based on Othello, and it was a basketball setting. It was a kid trying to work his way through, and there was a telling of Macbeth as a burger franchise that was done before. I like these quirky. I'm a big Shakespeare fan, so I'll watch anything that's either loosely based or a modern retelling, or just like a Kenneth Branagh staging of a play in cinematic form. For some reason, I've always just gravitated to the works of Shakespeare, and I can't get enough of it. So it may be weird, but I think those stories, much like Westerns, they have those same tropes you mentioned earlier about just the Western tropes. The story of the good guys and the bad guys, about trying to overcome greed, or when greed gets the better of you, when you try to think that you are outside the law. I mean, those are the things we've been dealing with as mankind since we were able to start coming up with stories.
Yeah. I thought we should be like try to branch into the actual content of the minute as well.
We should probably go ahead and dive in. I will say it's an interesting setup here because the last we left, it was only the bad guys in town. So this initial shot for the first couple of seconds here is the bad guys, I guess, trying to ride out of town. But it's really weird because you've got only a handful of horsemen sort of in the foreground, but you've got several on horseback almost acting like a wall. They're not going anywhere at the very back of the street. A couple of people are running, and then they start to run the opposite way, and we figure out why in a few seconds, because finally the town of Rockridge is coming, and they're going to start duking it out in the street.
Yeah. That's one of those weird things, though, as well, because obviously we're supposed to be on the side of the people of Rockridge, and because obviously there's good and bad and stuff, but there's still always that little thing of like, yeah, but all the people in Rockridge were like really racist earlier, so you're kind of like, I'm supporting the town because they're supposed to be the side you're on, but
oh yeah, but they had that big conversion last night before they built the new town.
I don't know.
Remember, it was a big kumbaya moment where they all realized, oh, okay, everybody, we'll all get together and have a good time. And actually, we talked about that a few minutes ago. What a nice staging of the scene, because it mirrored very closely to the very first scene where we see Lyle and all of the employees of the railroad, all of the white railroad worker or I guess overseers on one side of the tracks, and all the railroad folks on the other side of the tracks. And they sort of had that first standoff about, I want to hear some singing. We had an exact, almost duplicate shot, although not with railroad tracks, when those railroad workers showed up several minutes ago before they built the town of Rockridge for this big fight. All the railroad workers ended up collating on one side of the screen, and all the town of Rockridge was on the other side with a true divide between them, just like it was at the very beginning of the movie. But once they decide, all right, we'll give land to everybody, the smiles, it was instantaneous. Everybody was embracing. They were actually, it suddenly was like, in an instant, Mel Brooks said, like, in the blink of an eye, you can get rid of the stupidity of racism if you just stop being stupid. And I love it. I've always loved this message. I think, for me, we're doing Gene Wilder movies because we love Gene Wilder, and he's not actually in this movie a whole lot compared to other movies, but he makes such an indelible impression as the Waco Kid. But this movie, in and of itself, the message for me is so powerful. It still is effective today, 45 years after its release. And I think people that have never seen it can still get a powerful message from it if they're open to it.
Yeah. Have you guys talked at all about, 'cause I know it was doing the rounds quite a bit a couple of months back, but there's a YouTube video by Lindsay Ellis, and she did an analysis of Mel Brooks and political messaging in his movies and stuff. And
actually, I did not.
Oh,
I've not even seen that.
Oh, it's really good. It's very, very in depth. But basically, hers was a response to, people on the internet nowadays, where people complain about things getting too PC, and then saying like, "Oh, Mel Brooks, you couldn't have made Blazing Saddles nowadays," and et cetera, et cetera. Like, oh, he didn't care about being PC and all this sort of stuff. And she had a whole big analysis of saying like, well, here's why Mel Brooks isn't some kind of edgelord internet troll like you're trying to equate yourself with.
Right.
And going through exactly why his films work and how he's always punching up. As everything he does is, oh yeah, he's, doing things that seem very edgy, but he's always on, the right side, basically. Like I think it's like a good 40-minute video. And basically it's just, at the end of it, the message was like, don't try to use Mel Brooks to defend your edgy, racist, offensive humor, because his humor is much more intelligent than that. So you can't equate the two things at all, basically.
We mentioned this very early on. Walt actually ran into a couple of, as we're doing research and, as we do with these podcasts, you want to try to get as much detail and information, have something to talk about, and maybe impart some knowledge to the listener. He came across a couple of just basically either sites or groups that thought, look how edgy he was for being as racist. And Walt's like, wait a minute. Did you watch the same movie? Because don't equate the fact that there were racist words with Mel Brooks being a racist. He was actually punching racism in the face.
Yeah.
But, some people, they hear a word and they just immediately lock down on that one word and assume they know exactly what the movie's about. And you can't. You got to know the context.
Well, I think there's even clever little things happening. Like in the minute here, you have things of we have the fantastic Liam Dunn, obviously as the preacher, goes over and does he need the guy or does he punch him in the face?
Yeah, he needs him, and that's what the script called for. We only get one shot that I see here in this minute, but the script calls for him to repeatedly keep kneeing people in the nads and then say,
"Oh, forgive me, Lord."
Yeah. But I love that though, because that in itself, that's a little 2-second joke. But it's essentially it's well, what's that saying about not just the priesthood or anyone, people who are inherently religious who go do horrible things and then just ask for forgiveness, because it does happen. Of course, as a person being from Ireland, the country has a history of priests doing very horrible things and stuff. But it reminded me as well of you do see this a lot in westerns and just other genres as well. One of my all-time favorite movies is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and that has obviously Eli Wallach's character. Every time he shoots somebody, he always blesses himself. He always does the little the signs of the cross, and
somehow that's going to absolve himself of whatever sin he just committed.
Yeah, exactly. Where you're just oh yeah, so I'm putting on the dressing of just been yep, sorry. And then you even get things later on, Tony Soprano and stuff. All the entire story arc in The Sopranos of Tony's wife is that she knows exactly what her husband's doing. She's benefiting from all of it, but she considers herself to be very righteous and very religious and all this kind of stuff. And it's getting into this real weird thing of people who put on the airs of been moral and good and it's a respectable preacher and stuff, but just going on kicking someone in the nuts and then just been oh, sorry, Lord, and just walking on as if it didn't happen.
Since we're on this thing, I want to back up a line, but with Reverend Johnson, and I got the script in front of me, is he constantly is what the direction says is Reverend Johnson looking up, forgive me, Lord, then knees to a groin. Forgive me, Lord, knee to a groin. Forgive me, Lord, knee to a... So he's just constantly going up the street, praising or saying, forgive me, Lord, and then kneeing somebody in the nads.
Well, even
before that...
If you wanted to even consider that, though, as a comment on just confession as well. It's just just people go out and sin, and then all you have to do is come in and say you're sorry to God, and you just go out and do it again. It's you get a little 2-second joke there. You could read as much into that as you want, but also wanted to give a shout out too, if you've not mentioned it in the show previously, because I absolutely love Liam Dunn as an actor, and one of the ending scenes of What's Up, Doc, where he's the judge and the entire cast of the movies come in to report everything that's happened, and he's this really crotchety old git judge, is just one of the best comedy scenes in any film ever, where he's just literally lining up his pills and stuff and saying to the bailiff, you know what this yellow pill's for? It's to remind me to take this blue pill. You know what the blue pill's for? They're too scared to tell me. It's everything's getting more and more stressed, and everybody has the whole thing with Kenneth Mars there, and just oh, who are you? I am you. You are me? No, I am you. Forget it.
No, actually, that movie did come up and is one I have not seen, but it's now on my list to watch as soon as I carve out free time from doing a podcast.
that one's very, like, that court scene is at like pretty much the very end, and it's about 20 solid minutes, and it's it's better than the rest of the movie put together, I would say. But
I'm going to check it out. I've got it on my. I always keep a list as we have guests suggesting either movies they're working on or movies that they're suggesting or that come up in our conversation. So there's always some homework to do post finish of a season. Before we start, and I'm glad we don't really have lines. They wrote these, and this is what happens when you write a script. You start thinking about how it might work, and then you get on set and you realize, okay, we've got all these stunt actors as extras in the background, all throwing fake punches and stuff. It's hard to actually have a lot of dialogue going, but there was supposed to be a line where Taggart was supposed to yell, bad guys, pull yourselves together. Here come the good guys. It's never been done before in a Western, but once, maybe just this once, we can beat them. Like he's recognizing, oh crap, here's that Western trope of the big finale, whether it's the big gunfight, whether it's the one-on-one between the good guy and there's always the standoff, right, in every Western.
Oh, yeah.
And in this case, we take the standoff to be an entire riot of every single person in Rock Ridge.
I have to say, too, though, looking at this and having, like, you know, at the minute, we're still in the midst of the Tim Burton Batman movies in Batman, and just looking at the shooting of a wide-scale riot from, like, Mel Brooks back in, like, you know, the 20, nearly 30 odd years before, you know, Batman and Batman Returns. I was like, oh, he's doing it better than Tim Burton did in those, because very few action scenes in those Batman movies. And looking at them minute by minute, you're just like, oh, this guy has a clue how to shoot like a big like riot scene with like loads of people. Like you look at Gotham City, there's about 60 people at any given time, and maybe even like 35 in most scenes. And like anytime something's happening, it's just like, oh, he doesn't know how to do this. Like it's just Tim Burton doesn't have the training to be like, oh, do big action set piece. That's not his interest.
That's not his thing. Well, I do have a note that Mel Brooks recognized that we were going to need to have a scene like this. And so very early on, some of the background extras that we see consistently between the railroad foremen, the folks in Rock Ridge, there were a total of nearly 80 stunt people who worked as extras, so that way they would already have sort of the training of how to throw the fake punches, sell the fake punches. If you pause in places, you can see where people are not really hitting each other, but the action is there's so much to see on the screen, and when you start throwing in dust and a little bit of smoke from all of the dirt coming up and all the the leftover explosions from just a few minutes ago, it does hide a lot of that. And next thing you know, you're kind of just... Mel Brooks is really good about this, is we start seeing almost like these little mini vignettes, like what you pointed out, Reverend Johnson with Forgive Me, Lord, kneeing somebody in the nuts. It's so quick, but if you pause, you can see all the fake throws and fake hits on the sides, but we don't pay attention because we're drawn to the character who's giving us a moment on screen. Right around second 14 in this minute, 13 to 14, we kind of pull back to another wide shot. And I don't know if you've got it up in front of you, but there's two people just to the left of two horses, to the left side of the screen as you're looking at it. You're going to see the one guy throw a punch and then miss him by a mile, and then the other guy acts like he just got walloped by a 2x4. In fact, I don't know how that guy doesn't need a neck brace. He puts his head so far back.
It's one of those things, though. It's still happening. Again, not in our Batman movies, but quite infamously after like Dark Knight Rises came out, there's scenes in that where it's just like Batman's punching people. He's about a mile away from them, and they're flying over the place. And apparently, people in the cinema were going like, "What the hell? Like it's 2012, people! For Christ's sake, you must know how to shoot these things by now."
We should be able to figure out where to angle the camera so the punch gets, we can hide the fact. One of my all-time favorite gags when I was a kid, I saw this movie when I was 9 or 10 the very first time. It was a network television broadcast, so it took me a while to get to the theatrical one, and then we've talked about it extensively through the season about what was left in or what was added in for the TV release versus the theatrical. But this scene was always the same. Gabby Johnson, who we've always suspected to be also a bit of a town drunk, when he's drinking the whiskey and the guy comes back, he punches somebody in front of him, one of the bad guys. Gabby Johnson grabs him by the collar, and you think, what's he going to do? And he just breathes on him, and the guy passes out. It's such a great little bit.
That's the thing. Like, what? It's a joke you only grow to appreciate as you get older too. Because I had the misfortune of meeting a few people nowadays who drink so heavily that they could do that too as well. Like when you're a kid,
they could gag you.
Like you think like when you're a kid, you're like, oh, that's very silly. But like, oh, you're out in the world, you'll bump into guys who could legitimately do this as well.
Harriet Johnson apparently has learned how to throw a good right hook. They have to speed up the film a little bit, but the lady who is married to, or at least we assume she seemed to be married to Samuel Johnson, because earlier when our sheriff had to hold himself hostage to get the town to not shoot him, and she's like, "Is anybody going to help that poor man?" And it's Samuel Johnson's like, "Hush, Harriet, that's a sure way to get him killed." She gave that fire and brimstone speech in the church about the governor being the leading asshole in the state. Well, I
was just going to ask, though, because, she has this punch, but I'm wondering what's prompted the punch, because it seems like the guy has broken something over his knee, and that's what's inspired. It's as if he looks like he's got something, and he's like he's just cracking it. And I was wondering that maybe it was supposed to be, maybe they cut it down from, like, when Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where they couldn't afford the horses, so they just were clattering the coconuts together, and they just made that a joke in the movie. I was wondering if there was supposed to be some kind of joke there where like he's trying to make the sound effect of a punch by snapping a thing over his knee.
No, it's so hard to see. That's her umbrella, her parasol.
Oh, okay.
And he's breaking her parasol over his knee. But because they speed up the film to make it look like it's a lot more frenetic, when she punches him and he goes diving back through the candy glass window there, I'm like, oh yeah, Harriet Johnson, look at that. She's not going to take it from this guy.
Yeah, fair enough.
I didn't know if you ever noticed this. Right around second, because as soon as we cut from the punch, there's a hard cut to back in the middle of the street. We have a guy sitting on a horse whooping somebody as another man is picking up a woman and like leaving with her over his shoulder. And while the main character that's whooping somebody with his, I don't know what it is, like a strap, Mongo comes in and lifts the horse up. Did you notice that is not a real horse?
No, until you said that. I'm literally watching the second, and until you said that this very minute, I was like, no, I thought it was a genuine horse.
Every time when I was a kid watching
Holy
this,
crap, it's very blatantly a fake horse now.
It is so
this is one of those
obvious.
things I was like, how? Yeah,
and it's like, how did I not notice?
This is like, how could I not have seen this before?
Yeah, it is so blatantly fake. It looks pretty real when he's just standing there. There's enough action in front of it. But as soon as those forelegs go up in the screen and you realize they don't move at all, and then it like bounces 4 or 5 times when it rolls over, it's like, oh my God, how did you not notice that? We actually had a thing like that in Batman Returns this season. There's a bit, if you know the movie, there's a bit where the Penguin goes to visit his parents' grave. Mm-hmm. And I remember even as we were recording, it was obviously John and my co-host and Father Dave. And I was going, you guys, can you see what's wrong in the minute? And they're like, no. It's like this second. They're like, no, I can't see it. And it's like, as he walks past the tombstone, it completely wobbles. And it's one of those things, like, as soon as you see it, you can't not ever see it again. But it's like, holy crap. Oh my God. So you had Father Mowry?
Oh yeah, he was on just to talk about, the religious aspects, because there's a surprising amount of them in Batman Returns. But yeah, he was there to talk about the Penguin visiting his parents' grave and stuff.
Well, that's funny that you would have him on a minute where you would point something out like that now you can't unsee it. We had him on for the minute when the sheriff shows up and everybody, goes dead quiet and he walks up to give his, excuse me while I whip this out.
Oh, yeah.
If you go back and watch, did you notice that when the sign, Welcome Sheriff, rolls up, there's actually a person who pulls and tugs and lets it up and then crosses his arm. And Father Mowry was like, I always thought it just went up all by itself. Like, that was the humor. But you can see the guy actually give it a quick little tug to make it go up.
Yeah, that's the thing. This is what the movies by minutes is supposed to be all about. Is they just go, now we're finally getting into the nitty gritty of seeing these things that you could never have noticed before. But now they're so, like, once you look at it in this level, under this intense a microscope, it's just like, Jesus Christ, oh yeah, everything in this is so detailed.
Well, and it depends on your likes. My wife hates when I point something like that out. because she said, you know what? I don't need you to ruin the movie. I'm like, it doesn't ruin the movie for me. I think it's kind of neat to sort of, it's like you're peeling back and reminding yourself, every movie's got flaws, and there's nothing wrong with pointing out some little things like that. It doesn't make the movie any less in my mind.
Yeah, I love it myself. Like, we had some guests who were very enthusiastic about it. Like, there's a bit in the first Batman movie where, he blows up Axis chemicals, and then it's just like, oh yeah, he was doing it remote control, and then the Joker comes in a helicopter, and Batman does the hero turn because he can't turn his head, so he has to swivel his whole body around. Mm-hmm. And if you look at that scene, his belt drops like a good 3 or 4 inches. Like, he's just standing there and the belt just drops down. And we mentioned it at the time, our guest, Kiri, and she was just like laughing her head off. And she just kept playing it over and over again as we're recording. It's like some people really, really take to those things if you point it out to them.
Our next gag here is, which I love. I've always liked this one too. And I always find myself whenever I'm like wrestling around with like the dogs or something and I accidentally bump a dog that wasn't expecting it, or if there's actually that sort of like not an intentional hit, but you kind of bump and I was like, oh, sorry. Well, we get the very, very same sorry from Bart or from Waco Kid and Bart, because we see him at about second 39. Bart is getting ready to swing at one guy. The Waco Kid is swinging at a guy, and they sort of move almost like countering each other. And it ends up that now Bart's got his back to the Waco Kid. Jim turns around, grabs Bart, and decks him. And he's like, oh, God, sorry. Like, I didn't know it was you.
It might be a generational thing, but this really reminds me of, I don't know if you ever played the old, well, I had it in the Sega Mega Drive, but Streets of Rage, which was like a side scroll, punch 'em up, kind of thing. But when you had the 2-player option, you could also hurt the person you were working with. So
friendly fire, huh?
Yeah, so you'd be like literally in the middle of fighting, and all of a sudden you turn around and punch them in the face, and then their health would go down and stuff because of it. But like I knew people when you were playing with them, they would just you just get some assholes who come in, like all they wanted to do was beat you up as well, and it was the most infuriating part of that damn game. But as soon as I saw this, I was like, that's what that was like. I guess it's just Streets of Rage. That's it all over. Streets of Rage 20 years before it was even made.
There's so much to look at. I almost feel like we're doing one of those Where's Waldo pictures. But if you look in the same seconds where Jim apologizes and says to Jim, oh, sorry, in the background, there's a man on one side of a post that's holding up a second story sort of balcony. And another guy that's trying to throw punches, and he keeps going from one side of the post to the other side, to the other side, to the other side. He's like ducking around, like that's all his action. He's just can't see me. I love seeing these little things to make it look like there's so much action going on, and those guys are actually still doing it. When we get to the next shot, we have a little cut, and it shows Jim and Bart start running up the street to go after the next group of bad guys. You still see them underneath by that post. So these actors were doing a really good job of whenever they had to reset and go back to one, they remembered where they were. That's the thing I will point out. I like looking for continuity errors, and I haven't found too many from these cuts. Like everybody seems to stay matched with where they were in the fight scene.
Yeah,
and that maybe is because they were all stunt people. A lot of them were.
That probably is it. Yeah, they just have years and years of knowing how important that stuff is. So it's just inbuilt in them. Even if Mel Brooks wasn't there to say them, I don't even know how much Mel Brooks would that even be his job? It probably would be like a second unit person to be like, well, make sure in these wide shots the continuity is working and stuff.
Well, there are people that, and I've done a lot of film acting as well now, and I don't know when they started really hiring a dedicated continuity person. They used to have a script continuity person for Hollywood's aging sexism. They used to call it the script girl was responsible for. That was like the person that was hired to make sure that, okay, you delivered the line this way the last time we shot. Now you're giving it a different way, trying to make sure the script stays continuous. Now they've got actual people that will film or take pictures. So that way, if you go on break and come back, they'll make sure that, oh, you didn't have the bag there, or you didn't have your cuff that way, or you didn't have your tie that way. And so they really try to keep track of that, both in terms of costuming and action at the same time.
Yeah. the whole circumstances is making me remember. Have you ever seen Black Dynamite?
No, I haven't.
It's really, really terrific. It's a spoof blaxploitation movie, but it's made to look like it's like it is a blaxploitation movie. Like they put in, you can see the boom mic popping in all the time. You're very aware that it's a movie kind of thing. And there's a great bit where they're having a big fake fight. And there's just, you know, they're doing the things where you see the punches have been pulled and like they're nowhere near hitting each other. And it's just one guy against another. And then all of a sudden you just see at one point the punch actually lands on the stunt guy. And he just stops and goes like, motherfucker. And it just does this hard cut. And it's it's the same guy who was fighting him before and a completely different guy there. And just him getting the crap knocked out of him.
Oh my gosh. We're going to get now to the joke you mentioned very early on in this episode about Lily von Stupp. She's taken it upon herself to entertain the German soldiers that were apparently recruited in 1874. Yeah. And she is singing the initial bars from The Producers, the song that Zero Mostel, Gene Wilder, and Kenneth Mars were all singing together.
Yeah, this is it's like all these things nowadays and people talking about like, oh yeah, movie universes and people like referencing like, oh, how clever it is that Marvel's got all this continuity and Quentin Tarantino's, oh, there's little connections between his movies. It's like Mel Brooks doing it way back when, like ages before everybody else. Is like, but he's doing it very deft-handedly, very subtly. So it's like, yeah, you really have to, you'd have to know what you're looking for, kind of thing. If you went to see this casually in the cinema, unless you'd seen like The Producers a bunch of times, there's no way you're going to pick up on that.
Yeah, I guess the other phrase we've used this a couple of times is before the idea of Easter eggs, Mel Brooks loved putting his own Easter eggs in his movies.
Yeah.
And if you were a Mel Brooks fan, you'd be like, oh, wait a minute, I recognize that tune. Like if you go back to when Lily von Stupp we first see the poster on the wall of the Rockridge Saloon, and before she goes on stage, we sort of hear her sing a little bit, like she's warming up her voice in the green room, and we have just a few bars of music. That's the opening bars of Springtime for Hitler.
Yeah.
Also from The Producers. So
yeah,
I think Mel Brooks loves doing that. I love he includes jokes from his own movies, sort of like as homages to his past work.
I think I could understand it too. I can imagine I would have the same mentality of like, yeah, I made a thing I was really proud of. Let's just have a little reference to it in there. Like, I think even people said like, recently Jordan Peele's movie Us came out. And apparently, like, people said, like, oh, yeah, you can see in, like, one of the opening scenes on, like, beside, like, a fun house, you can see the words Get Out scratched on the wall. So he's obviously throwing in, like, I did Get Out as well. Like, I just wanted people, like, as a little joke there and stuff. So I get it. I get the mentality of wanting to do it. I was also very happy to see this because love Madeline Kahn. And I also have a real thing, like, something about me, I really love women wearing suits, like full blown, like waistcoat, ties and stuff, and the hat and everything. So I just had it's a real particular thing with me. So I was just very happy, like, I just love seeing this incredibly dapper outfit she's got on. And depending how much you know about what her character's model off of,
this is actually supposed to be sort of a modern parody of Marlene Dietrich, who she actually makes an entrance wearing sort of pantsuit outfit before dressing more, quote, ladylike. So it was a definite call out to Marlene Dietrich for Madeline Kahn to play.
I did also see a thing because I do love Madeline Kahn, but for some reason I always get her mixed up with Bernadette Peters, and I had no idea why. But I googled it earlier. It's like, were they in a movie together? And then one of the top results in Google was some other guy writing in a forum, I always get Madeline Kahn and Bernadette Peters mixed up. Is there a reason for this? And I don't know what it is. Because there is, like, we look at them, it's like, I guess they kind of look a little bit alike, but
they may favor each other, but then their acting and their speech patterns are so different that, and maybe it's because I've loved Madeline Kahn since I was a kid.
Yeah.
I hate that she died when she did. She would be acting still to this day and brilliant still to this day if she were still alive.
Oh yeah, totally.
Mel Brooks actually said of all the actresses he's ever worked with, and that's saying a lot considering who he married, that Madeline Kahn was his favorite to work with.
I don't know if it's like a weird form of the like Mandela effect or something, but for some reason I just always associate like those two people just get blurred in my head. And I don't know, again, because I think someone else recently said to me, like, that they get mixed up between, like Kurt Russell and Val Kilmer. And to me, that's like, what? They're completely different guys. But I guess maybe if you just, I guess they do look kind of similar. Maybe it's just certain things in certain people's heads. They're just like, I don't know. For some reason, these two people just keep getting.
I'll say I can forgive a Madeline Kahn, Bernadette Peters mistake more than a Val Kilmer and Kurt Russell mistake. That's a harder one to swallow. Well, we're almost at the end of the minute, but we get a great crane shot now. And once again, the continuity works beautifully. If you watch where the woman in the yellow dress was, if you watch where Bart is, if you watch where Jim is, it all matches. At the very bottom of the screen, as you'll see it pull back, the Reverend is holding up his Bible and still yelling at people. Gabby Johnson is at the very dead center bottom of the screen. Mongo's at the screen. They're all still fighting. And as the camera starts to pull up, did you notice Mongo slugs Gabby Johnson?
No.
He doesn't realize it's Gabby. He turns him around and gives him a slug.
He doesn't seem very apologetic about it either, though. He's just
he doesn't. He's like, I just want to punch people.
Maybe it was just a thing on set that's like, these two guys, they don't get on with each other, and then it's just like, this is the crane shot today. It's the last day of filming. Who cares? I'm going over. I'm just gonna pop this guy in the goddamn face.
Yep. Well, and Gabby falls down. If you watch him, and he starts to stagger, and he you almost look at it like he's yelling at Mongo, like, "What are you doing?" And Mongo's still stalking him. And I hate that we don't get this 1 or 2 more seconds with you, because we still look like this crane shot is only centered in the town of Rockridge in the Old West. Maybe if you pause it at the right second, you can see at the very far upper left corner of the screen, it looks suddenly like there's different architecture for buildings behind the water tower and the grocery store and where they're fighting on Main Street. So we're going to have to wait for tomorrow to see what the rest of this shot looks like.
It's kind of like it's a nice little divide of just like, this is where you could almost think that this was a normal narrative movie up until the end of this minute, and then it just goes, nope.
And I remember, because as we're wrapping this up, as a wind down, do you at all remember, or if you can, your impression of when this shot was first revealed, which we're going to, a little teaser for tomorrow, folks. Spoiler if you haven't seen this movie when it came out 45 years ago. When you first realized, oh my God, it's pulling up from an actual Western town set, and we see modern, at the time when the movie came out, 1974 LA, and then studio, indoor studio buildings for Warner Brothers. Do you remember, what the hell?
I think I kind of went at it at a weird angle, because before I saw the movie, I remember we used to have around the house, film magazines back in the day used to give away video cassettes occasionally, every maybe once a year, maybe once every couple of years, but they'd have top 10 most essential scenes in movies or something like that. Back before you got YouTube and things like that, where you just had these things to hand, and you can just you can send people links to them. But this was back in the days, film magazines, yep, this is great scenes. We've compiled them on a videotape for you. And I remember one of them was they just came up completely without context. They just said, this is a scene from Blazing Saddles. And it was the Dom DeLuise showing them how to do the dance and stuff. Mm-hmm. So in my head, I was always like, yeah, there's a bit where they're in an old 1950s musical where it's everyone's in top hats and tails, and Dom DeLuise is there. Well, then at the time I didn't know it was Dom DeLuise, but so I was always kind of aware. It's this Blazing Saddles apparently has one bit where it just goes off into a different studio or something. So then when it happened in the movie, I was like, oh, so that's how that happens. I was able to kind of piece it together through that. But it was, so I guess it might have been, you could consider that it was spoiled for me. I guess it would be another way of saying it. But I think it is still every time I do watch it though, I've seen the movie a bunch of times. Mm-hmm. I'm still I always kind of forget how far it goes. The fact there's a bit where Headley goes and he's sitting in the cinema watching Blazing Saddles, and it cuts to a shot of Bart outside, and he's like, oh crap. And then he's like, yeah, I remember it goes that far with it.
It's incredible. I just remember as a kid, I had that look of when a dog doesn't know what to make of something and it cocks his head and goes, I feel like I do that every time. I'm like, what are we doing? That's right. We're going into modern time to tell a new story. And we're going to actually oh my God, just the spilling into one set after the other, then into the commissary, and all of the visual gags and little Easter eggs that we're going to have over the next few minutes. It's just ridiculous the amount of stuff we'll have to talk about. But unfortunately for us, this minute does in fact come to an end here before we get to see that tracking shot. That'll happen tomorrow, and we'll definitely continue to watch the fight spill into a different set at the end of the day tomorrow. Niall, you've been our guest today for this minute. You've got a podcast of your own that you've sort of referenced a few times throughout, but before we get to that, do you have any other notes for this minute? Anything else that you may have thought about or wanted to chat about that we didn't cover yet?
I think I would be remiss if I didn't try to pitch to you. Like, I know maybe you've got the entire movie filled up already, but if you have any minutes left, you should approach him about it, because my co-host, John, and I only found this out like maybe 4 or 5 months ago, apparently he hates Gene Wilder. Like, pathologically despises him. And it was one of these things, I've known this guy like 12 years. He's never brought up that he has like such a ferocious hatred of Gene Wilder. But like, and I remember when he told me this when he was I was in his house where he was there with his girlfriend, and she was like, yeah, he has. He put on Young Frankenstein one time just to show me how bad he is and stuff like that. They were pointing at the screen going, look at this and all this sort of stuff. So like, I was like, this blew my mind, because I was like, what? How have you never mentioned this before? Because I love Gene Wilder, so I was just like, what the hell? Where did this come from?
Well, I guess we got to find one oddball in the bunch, because we have yet. I mean, we can't even find dirt on Gene Wilder. That's how good of a guy he was.
So I would implore you just to have like if you ever want to get someone on who's just going to come in and dump on everything, reach out to John Parker and see if he'll come on for you.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing with this, we've already got the minutes filled up for the last few scenes, but it might be interesting to reach out to him, and because what we're probably going to do with the end of this season, like we did last season, is ask some of our guests if they want to give us a 5 or 6 minute sort of solo recap of the movie and their time on the show. And then Walt and I will just string together kind of a long montage of discussion from previous guests as a wrap up. And it'd be fun to just say, well, this guy didn't show up, but we had to find the one oddball in the bunch that actually was dropped on his head as a baby and doesn't like Gene Wilder.
It was one of those things, because I've tried to get to it. It was like, why do you hate him so much? But John has a lot of weird things that he very ferociously hates. So like, in a lot of it, when I try to get to it, it's just like, oh, it's just blind hatred. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Just rage.
It's just like, gosh. It's just like, oh, just let him go and hate it.
So we're guaranteed he will never listen to our podcast.
Unless he was just like, I'd be very disturbed if he did. I'll be kind of very disturbed and probably not all that surprised if he was just sitting alone in a room, just listening to every episode of the Wilder Ride, just seething.
And seething, like, these guys don't know what they're talking about.
He's just
how do they miss it? It's so obvious.
You finally get him on. He just like, okay. So today we're joined by John Parker. He's like, all right, egghead, sit down. I'm going to tell you some stuff. And it's just a 3-hour tirade of like, and then in minute 22 of Young Frankenstein, you said this, and let me tell you this. How about that?
It'd be funny if I just immediately cut and just go to like a big explosion in the background. Like, oh, John? We lost him. So, all right. Well, you guys are on a podcast of your own. Actually, you sort of changed the name a little bit from one season to the other, but it's still all about the Tim Burton right now reinvention of Batman in the movies. It was inspired by Frank Miller's The Dark Knight. It was the first time we saw a Batman movie, in my mind, that was actually a darker Knight, and I loved it. I was a huge fan of Tim Burton's Batman. I love the soundtrack. Danny Elfman's music I've always been a fan of ever since. You can always tell the Danny Elfman soundtrack. So tell us a little bit about because you're in the midst of season 2 at this recording anyway, and your plan is to go through all of those the 80s and 90s Batman movies. Yeah,
it was. It's kind of weird to consider like, oh, these ones were like a series, considering like, oh yeah, midway through they changed directors, and by the time you get to like the 4th movie, it does not feel as if it's in the same series as the first movie, because it's so completely different. But yes, we're doing. We're going like, oh yeah, the plan is go through all the Batman movies. But we started with 89. Some people have poo-pooed them, like, you should have started with 66, but like, no, we wanted to jump straight into 89. So yeah, we're doing 89 through 97. So Batman up to and including Batman and Robin, which very looking forward to digging into that thing. And, then of course, because other people doing the Dark Knight, trilogy. So like, oh, we'll stop there. But, we're having a great time over there. very, very much enjoyed doing the first season. That's done in its entirety. Yeah, we're nearly at the... It's always difficult because we've got such a big buffer zone in recording. Like, we're nearly finished recording season 2, but I think we're still maybe about 3/4 of the way in airing or something like that. But it's, yeah, we had a lot of, very enthusiastic guests come on. A lot of people really, really love Batman Returns. Like, that's a movie that's it's aged very well in the public eye, apparently. Every guest we've had on is just like, most of them have been doing nothing but singing its praises and saying it's the best movie and stuff. And I was gearing up because we got Batman Forever coming up. It'll be at the end of this year. I'm like, oh, this is going to be like the black sheep because people like to make fun of Batman and Robin, but like no one really cares about Batman Forever. And in the build up, the amount of people who've been like, oh, I love Batman Forever. That's my favorite of the movies and stuff. So it's like, holy crap, we're going through like a renaissance of all these like movies, apparently. But of course, like, fortunately we didn't get you in for season 1. We're completely booked for season 2, unfortunately. But if you want to come on for any thoughts on Batman Forever, Alan, you're more than welcome to pop into this.
I was going to do the shameless thing and put you on record and say, I'm going to at least say now out loud, I would love to be on any of the minutes of Batman Forever. I actually do like that one. I like Val Kilmer. I was a big Jim Carrey fan, and I think I like that version of Batman. I have to go back and rewatch the Danny DeVito one. I kind of understood what was trying to take place on the screen, but to me it fell short of the first one. And I hate that because stylistically and everything, it was very, very good. It was just so dark, and Danny DeVito was brilliant as the Penguin.
Yeah.
But something about it got a little bit fun again. Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's the... Because I prefer the 89 movie. I think that's the best of them. But I know a lot of people, though, including my co-host, he thinks that the Returns is the best of the bunch. And the most succinct way to put it, like we've always said, is just like Batman Returns is a great Tim Burton movie. It's not a great Batman movie because Batman's so lost in the mix of everything that Tim Burton wants to do in that film. And in that regard, as a very... Like, I do love it now because it's such a bizarre, melancholy, warped, strange movie. And considering that was a summer blockbuster in 1992 was a mutant penguin man is going to murder a bunch of kids by drowning them in toxic waste. And it's set at Christmas and everyone's weird looking and there's like a woman dies and comes back as like a BDSM zombie fetishist and all this, like, crazy stuff is happening in Batman Returns. And because of that, now I do like, oh, it is a great movie. It's just not a great Batman movie. So, it's always it's kind of the realization we've made throughout recording. Whereas 89, I still think a lot of people really, really hate 89 because they're like, that's not Batman. But to me, that is Batman because that's the Batman I grew up with. So I don't mind like, oh, you can kill people. I'm kind of used to that concept because I grew up with Michael Keaton flat out killing people in that movie.
Awesome. Well, they can find you at it's obviously Batman or Bat Minute 89, or is it Batman Minute 89, the first one?
Oh, it's this is the awkward thing. The show's official title is Bat Minute. Season 1 we're called Bat Minute 89. Okay. We've changed everything. Now it's Bat Minute Returns, and then season 3 will be Bat Minute Forever. But the banner of the show is just Bat Minute. So if you type that into Google or into Twitter or into Facebook and stuff, just Batman by itself, you'll find the whole show. It should pop up there.
Excellent. And normally Walt has the duty, but I'll have to do it today. Obviously, our show, we've got the same sources of social media. So I encourage you, if you are not already following us on Twitter, liking us on Facebook, following our Instagram. We actually even have a listeners group. We have a lot of great conversation in there. You have to actually apply to join because it is a closed group. We keep that. So all the real big fans that want to talk about movies and Gene Wilder and whatever can be in there. So you just have to apply, answer a couple of questions from the main Facebook page, the public Facebook page, and we'll let you in. There's no cost. You just come on in and have fun, have a good time. And come on back tomorrow, Thursday. We're going to continue this crane shot that's going to actually start to pan over and start showing us the rest of the Warner Brothers lot. We will end with doing the French mistake, voila, but then Buddy Bazaar accidentally putting his leg in the water. And we get introduced to Dom DeLuise. So you're going to find that out tomorrow on this, The Wilder Ride. Penguin. What do you think of the Gotham series on TV? Have you liked that?
I did watch like the first 3 episodes, and I was like, nah.
And then you're out.
But now I've been told by people who do watch it, they're like, oh yeah, it gets crazier and crazier, and because of that, it kind of gets more enjoyable because it's just like
it does.
So like
it comes and goes, but unfortunately, it's not consistent enough that you just feel like you check out for a while, then you go binge and get back in, then you check out. It's an okay show.
I do feel like I kind of do now because it's ending. I was like, maybe I should just go and binge the whole thing.
Yeah,
but I might make that just for the purposes of the show, like a project for my summer or something. I'm like, I'm gonna watch all of Gotham, and then I might do an episode where we come back and it's like, okay, so I watched this show. And here's the final verdict, because it's come up in the show a bunch, but we always have to be like, no, we don't watch it.
By the time you would get to Batman Begins, let's say you wanted to do the Christopher Nolan trilogy, the Dark Knight series will have been out for already several seasons.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
See, we ran into that with the Wilder ride because we wanted to do Willy Wonka early on, but there was already the Everlasting Minute going on.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I told Walt, I'm like, you know what? Let them have that. We've got plenty of Gene Wilder material to get to for 2 or 3 seasons. And then when we eventually feel like it's been a couple of years, then we can get to we'll do Willy Wonka at some point.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's plenty of the shows that are covering the same stuff as well. Like there's 2 Clerks minutes running at the same time.
There's 2 Predators right now and 2 Jaws.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So,
but if you're going to do Jaws, I don't know if you're a fan of the Indiana Jones Minute, but their Patreon breakdown of Jaws that's the best.
So I love the show, but I'm not a Patreon supporter, so I guess I'll have to sign up to get into the proper good stuff. Because I keep seeing during the hiatus where people keep talking about like all these Patreon episodes. I'm like, oh, damn it, I better fork over some cash to get to this stuff.
I know it seems kind of cheesy, but I mean, I got 3 kids in college right now and one about to go next year. So just disposable income, you got to have it before you can dispose of it. And I don't even see mine anymore. So no, it's total bonkers. I actually had 2 different other couples who live in the UK. Well, one lives in Bognor Regis, and then another couple actually lives in just on the other side of the Wales border. So they always say, we are not Englanders, we're Welsh. And I'm like, I got it. So, but
I know some Welsh people, and they're very defensive about it. Yeah.
Yes. Well, the first one we had to do, we had not done our daylight savings time, so it was the 5-hour difference. But then all of a sudden, we went 3 weeks before you guys, and so it was only 4 hours difference for the other person, and then now it's back to 5 hours. So I wish we would just all agree on let's all move it ahead an hour. Everybody likes more daylight at the end of the day in the summer. Let's just never set the clocks back again, and let's all be done with it and stop this nonsense of changing it back and forth.